All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for a panel today. My name is Dylan Fisher with the North San Diego Business Chamber. I am the Economic Development Manager, and we are going to be doing the third in a series of webinars today focused on resilience, reinvention, and resurrection. We are excited to be joined by 4 chamber members that are experts in this field. Today, we will be having a 45-minute interactive panel followed by 30 minutes of moderated question and answers. If you guys do have questions throughout the panel here, please make sure to drop the questions in the chat feature below. And Dave will do his best, the moderator today, Dave Rosenberg with Locked On Leadership, to get through those questions during that time. And I will kick it off to Dave. Dave, how are you?
Good, Dylan. Thank you so much. It's an honor, and I'm very excited to be here to help out our fellow chamber members. As Dylan said, today's topic is resilience, reinvention, and resurrection. How to seize opportunity when shift happens. The chamber's been fantastic at modeling this for us as we've all been reeling from recent events. This is just one example of how we can reinvent ourselves. But what we want to look at today is whether as an individual or as a company, how we can incorporate those 3 characteristics into our lives, how we can be more resilient, how we can reinvent ourselves because there's a ton of opportunities available, and then resurrect ourselves and come out of this stronger. I know the more of us that come out of this in a better place, the faster our recovery is going to be. So we're here to help. We have a distinguished group of panelists to help us do this today. So let me introduce them one at a time. First, we have Brian Jackson. Brian, why don't you go ahead and turn your video on. Brian is the president of Sandler Training. He is what I call a pandemic pontificator. In other words, he's someone that believes that quarantine is actually a perfect cover for introverts like him. He gets to spend his time recharging, and when he isn't Zooming, with clients, he's playing in his vegetable garden with his wife and his 4 children. I suspect if I asked his wife, she would say she's playing in the garden with her 5 children if he's anything like me. But welcome, Brian. And then we have Cheri Nasa, the founder and CEO of the Center for Executive Excellence. Cheri is the author of Work on Purpose, How to Connect Who You Are with What You Do. She is also writing a new book, and I apologize, I don't have the title there, but we'll eagerly look forward to that. She's also an avid blogger, and with articles featured in both Forbes and the Huff Post. But I think the most exciting thing about Cheri is that she can actually recite the Promesa de Lealtad, or the Pledge of Allegiance, in Spanish. So thank you, welcome, Cheri. And finally, but far from least, Clarence Kudanis. Did I get that right, Clarence? Unmute yourself there. And he is the CEO of WorkSculpt. So they're a firm that helps companies build operations and organizations that drive sustained growth. Clarence, a little known fact, he actually set out to be a surgeon, but he quickly realized it was more fun to hold his own life in his hands than somebody else's, so he decided to become a race car driver when he traded his scalpel in for a steering wheel. So welcome, everybody. So we want to get started with our first topic. We want to explore resilience first. And why don't we start with you, Clarence, since your career seems to be one that embodies resilience and a lot of changes here. Why is resilience important to everybody?
I think just very basically so you don't die, right? It is really about being adaptable, being able to withstand difficulties that come up. And I think, as an entrepreneur and as a business manager or owner, certainly you'll have difficulties throughout the course of starting and growing a business and making it succeed. So just being better at that, I think, starts to build the muscles and the skills and the experience and expertise so that you can weather, far greater challenges and difficulties.
Okay. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that? Why they think resilience is important? Why did we lead off with resilience as our topic?
Yeah, I'll add to that. First of all, thank you, Dave, for facilitating the webinar today, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this and the series of webinars. I've found them very interesting, and I agree that the Chamber has done a terrific job of pivoting and showing others how to lead, so I appreciate the opportunity to take part in this. I think resilience is important because the opposite, it's about recharging and adapting, as Clarence said, and not just enduring and waiting for the stress to magically disappear. So it's really important that you find ways to adapt during times like this, during crucible times like this when we're all going through something completely different. It's not going to go away magically, so we have to remain vigilant and work on our adaptation skills.
Yeah, you said something pretty interesting because you said crucible times like this, and there seems to be a feeling out there that this is unique. And in a sense it is. Obviously, we don't have pandemics every day, or frankly, we haven't had one in well over 100 years, like one certainly of this magnitude. But on the other hand, change is everyday part of life. I mean, nothing's ever static, and we're always having to adapt and change. So this is really a skill, in my opinion, that we all should be demonstrating and working on and perfecting. But Brian, how can somebody really embrace resilience? What are some things they can do to ensure that they are flexible and malleable?
Well, being flexible and malleable, I don't know. The direction that I would go with that is that when it comes to being resilient, and this might not be answering your question directly, Dave, but the thing that first comes to my mind when I think of, what it takes to really get through these tough times is dialing in actually something that's very basic, a very basic behavior, a minimal sort of effort that you need to do, something that's very results driven, that's quantifiable, and giving yourself that sort of a goal every day so that you can stay focused on something that's actually quite simple and feel really good about completing it, and just by one day at a time completing those minimal goals, you start to put together a streak. And it's kind of like, we all know what that feels like, going to the gym, getting on that treadmill and the first few minutes feeling pretty unmotivated, but then eventually feeling really good, and eventually putting together a streak of days that you've gone to the gym. So that's what I would suggest, is quantifiable, minimal goals that can carry you through the tough times, because this too shall pass, right?
Yeah. So really what you're talking about is taking action, right? Because you can't change if you're not moving, right? You can't change direction if you're static. So if you're moving, at least then you can change direction. At least that's what I'm getting from what you have to say. Anybody else has anything they want to add to that?
I think I'll add something to that. I think from since we're talking about personal resiliency, right, we can get on the topic of the broader organizational ones. But if we're talking about personal resiliency, certainly taking firm action, setting those goals. I think another aspect of it is preparing for things that might sort of take you away from that, right? So imagine you're trying to do something, but there's all these other, factors that you have to deal with, right? So you're going to have to understand what your coping strategy, your default coping strategy typically is. Understand what makes you vulnerable, those, bad habits, tendencies, weaknesses that you might have, and then sort of proactively plan for how are you going to counteract. Figuring out, okay, if I'm tired or if I'm emotionally drained, maybe it's time for me to recharge, to take a step back, take a look at it from a different perspective. And even, and these are times where there's a lot of emotion, right? A lot of negative emotion, frankly, sadness, fear, grief. I mean, we have to figure out ways that we can cope with that as well. So I would say, sort of recognize what those are, and then enlist the help of others, right? So whether it's the help to, for guidance, maybe I'm trying to get over this hump, or I'm trying to accomplish this. How do I do it? What's the most efficient way to do it? But also there's an aspect of it of, because you are trying to do something, you'll ask that person to also help with accountability, right? Hold me accountable to help me do this. And then frankly, I think probably most of us will agree with this. I think a lot of us, it's about, and I think Brian mentioned it earlier, it's about being disciplined, right? Being disciplined about it, persevering through this, whatever the crisis is, whatever the problem is, until you finally achieve whatever it is that you what you set out.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. So you touched on a lot of different things here. I really like what you had to say about being aware of your coping strategies and understanding how you deal with stress. You know, that sort of self-awareness starts first, right, with us.
Mm-hmm.
But can you give me an idea, or maybe Cheri, what are sort of the common ways people cope with stress that may be unhealthy or ineffective? I really don't like unhealthy, but maybe ineffective, and maybe how can they substitute more effective behaviors?
Well, yeah, first of all, if you're not feeling a little bit of anxiety right now, then you're just not paying attention. I mean, there's a lot to be anxious about, and that anxiety distraction feedback loop is something that your brain can really be rewired toward right now. So it's very important that even before the COVID crisis happened, it's very important that leaders especially build self-awareness. We have to be aware of ourselves first, about what's going on inside of our own brains first. So when our brains get caught up in this anxiety distraction feedback loop, then the amygdala hears stress, hears there's something to fear, there's something to run away from, or there's something to feed. So fight, flight, or feed the stress. And so if you allow the stress to take over, then you will allow your amygdala to basically hijack your brain. When the amygdala goes into hijack, it cuts off the blood supply to your neocortex, or the thinking part of your brain, which is exactly what we need right now to think. And so self-awareness, mindfulness, even meditation. I'm not talking about, unicorns and rainbows and gumdrops here. I'm just talking about being aware of when you're starting to react instead of respond. So this is something that you should be building into your practice, regardless of whether or not you're going through a crisis, because even before this happened, life was stressful. Life in organizations was very stressful. So as leaders, we need to make sure that we are constantly being self-aware and mindful about what it is that's happening with our own brains, because you can't lead effectively when your plate is full but your cup is empty. So we really have to start with ourselves.
Dave, a couple of things real quick, if I could add.
Go ahead.
I agree with what Cheri and Clarence have both said. Something that I think is interesting is that a person's attitude usually doesn't change initially. You can go into a situation with sort of a negative mindset, a bad mindset, but it's only after the behaviors and doing something do you start to feel better, just because you've done it, just because you've made action and maybe even had some good results that encourage you. And so, a lot of, again, that's why it's so important to have quantifiable goals, to just get yourself moving, get yourself going. But as a leader, that's where sometimes people need some help with that. As a leader, you can help give people direction as to what that looks like. And Clarence brought up a really good point with accountability partners, during tough times, pairing people up, helping people hold each other accountable, but also encourage each other, and building a good culture in the team by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you guys are all spot on. What I got from this is, if we're aware of what our ineffective behaviors are ahead of time, then we can pre-plan a response when we're feeling that, and then execute that response, to Brian's point, which then makes us feel good because we've now done something positive instead of something negative, right? And if we plan that response properly, we go, okay, what are the things we have to focus on? Then that response is in line with that. And now we've moved one step farther down the road to wherever it is we want to go. So I think that's some really solid advice. I want to take a slight pivot. We've been talking about personal resilience here. And Clarence mentioned before, though, we also need, as organizations, we need some sort of organizational resilience. So what's that relationship between those two? And can an organization be resilient without people who are resilient? Or, and I think this is a really bit more potential, is can you have an organization of resilient people that is not resilient itself? And what does that look like? So, Cheri, you want to start us off with that one?
So yeah, an organization is made up of people, fundamentally, maybe not on paper, but in reality, an organization is a group of people. So I don't think that an organization can be resilient without a certain number of group of people who are leading it who are resilient. I think the inverse is not necessarily true, though. I think you can have resilient people who are not part of a resilient organization, and they will find ways to continue to thrive regardless of the organization.
I mean, Dave, I'd also like to add that when you're looking at an organization or you're trying to build one, there's a few things that you're kind of trying to make sure that you extend all these things we talked about in terms of resiliency as a person. You want to imbue an organization with that, right? So, for example, all of us, we all operate under a core set of values. We have, we exercise based on our principles. We behave according to a culture that we subscribe to. I mean, the same thing is true for an organization. You want to have that very well-defined values, behaviors, culture there. And then you also want to have a team, right? We talked a little bit, earlier about having people that help. I mean, that's essentially a team. Can the organization function where they truly are invested in and committed to helping each other succeed, right? A strong team. Another item is, we can't, escape it. We're using it right now. Systems, right? Updated systems and infrastructure so that we can do our work. We can communicate with each other. And then lastly, the process, right? The thing, that end-to-end thing that we do in our everyday life to create value. So if an organization has those things in place, you now have sort of like the foundation in which you can extend a lot of these other behaviors and values through.
So how do you create a culture within the organization, right? So culture happens either accidentally or intentionally, right? Every organization has a culture, and then some of them intentionally build a culture and others just let it happen. If you want to have resilience, a culture of resiliency, what are the proactive things an organization can do, the leaders in the organization, right? Because the organization doesn't do anything. It's really the leaders in the organization. Right. But what are the things they can do to ensure that resiliency is baked into the culture? It's part of the organization's DNA.
So, Dave, I love that question. And, it dovetails with what I wanted to contribute to what Clarence and Cheri said, which is that it really speaks to the importance, I think, of middle management, obviously depending on the size of the organization. But, you're talking about trying to change people's attitudes, keeping them positive, which is really dependent upon driving behaviors so that, that behavior can then drive the attitude. But the way that that's really, driven down and processed through the organizational structure is often lost in the middle management. And that's why I think it's so important, obviously, for leaders to lead by example, but also for leaders to make sure that the people between them and your army, your bulk mass employees, the middle management team, you've got to make sure they are dialed in. And if there's any sort of issues around attitude, those need to be addressed, and you need to help those people make sure they're dialed in, because they have a huge impact on the others that are beneath them.
Okay, well, let's move on. And we've talked a lot about resiliency. So now we have an organization that is resilient, made up of resilient people who can flex and everything. And we now have to figure out how we reinvent ourselves. So what do we do with this? We've got the flexibility. We're not set in our ways. We're ready to do a pivot. What next? Okay, tell us what we need to do, right? How do we come up with that? Clarence, you want to lead?
Well, let me think about that for a moment. I think if you're asking the question of, okay, so what next? You're really looking for those opportunities, right? Where is that need, if you will, to actually do something different? And so I think, it's interesting. A lot of times people say, well, how would you work in this crisis? Like, is there really anything there? And frankly, I say, absolutely, right? There is opportunity in every problem and every crisis. Now, me personally, I'm always looking, I'm naturally self-critical, but I'm also looking for problems, right? I'm looking for problems to solve. I think it was Jim Collins who coined the phrase with productive paranoia, right? And so you're always trying to find a way to do something better, whether it is in your own internal operations. But if you're more customer focused, obviously you're just looking at that whole end-to-end customer experience. Where can we do better? How are others doing it better? How are they beating us? Are there ways that we can, be better, improve the experience, do all those things, right? But there's also this sort of natural, I mentioned paranoia, there's this sort of natural looking for the risk, right? I mean, obviously we're in one of those uncontrolled risk environments, but certainly there are other risks that we can start tackling now, right? So the risk of not being, we're talking about resilience, the risk of being hit again, right? The risk of not being able to even capitalize on these new opportunities that are coming up. So in terms of tactical things, I think one of the things I would like to leave with the group is I think this idea that you're always continuously scanning for those opportunities, right? Whether it's risks to the business, changes in the market environment, emerging business models that come out of this. You're always looking for that. And you're also looking for opportunities to also improve the team, because you're just an individual, right? As a leader, you're an individual. But if you can get others in sort of that mindset as well, where they're always looking to improve, they're always looking, for ways to mitigate, avoid those risks, and also looking for those opportunities.
So let me back up, because there's a lot there covered. I want to try and focus us here. I think it was JFK who famously quoted that the Chinese character for a crisis is opportunity and danger, whereas I think that's an inaccurate statement, as from what I could read. Conceptually, it's accurate, right? So we have this crisis going on. There's opportunities here. How do we identify the opportunities, right? So, right, and let me throw this over to Brian.
So yeah, when I think of that, when I hear that question, I'm thinking about this in terms of, and we're looking at reinvention here. It's where has the opportunity changed between us and our potential clients? How do we need to adjust to our marketplace? And to give something or to offer something that's tangible that you can use right away, to me, it's quite simple. We need to really dial in what's changed with our clients by asking questions of them, really approaching our prospects, our clients from a diagnostician mindset, and playing dumb, even acting as though, because we don't want to rest on any assumptions. We don't want to think that we know what's going on. We really want to play dumb, say things like, help me understand what's going on in your world. And just listen. And it's so important to then really kind of adjust based on that feedback, right? But if we go in kind of assuming that we know what's going on in our client's world, how things have changed, and just offering sort of a prescription for what we think is the problem, we're gonna miss the boat a lot of times. So it's important to sort of play dumb, ask questions, and really learn what's changed in your client's world.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I know I tell my clients all the time, survey your clients. Don't guess, because we know what happens when you assume. Right. And this is a PG, so we won't go into detail. We're all adults here. Cheri, can you give us some examples, maybe out of your business, maybe out of some of your clients, of how they made a pivot, and more importantly, how they identified that pivot, and how they got buy-in from their people, or how one might get buy-in?
Well, I think that I completely agree with what Clarence and Brian are saying. I think that, first of all, we have to realize that there will be no toggling. There will be no going back to the office and punching in the code and hitting your card and everybody just gets back to normal. That will not happen. There will be no toggling. So but the other thing that's true is that, again, regardless of whether COVID came or not, disruption is a natural part of business. So to Clarence's, comment about constantly being a little bit paranoid out there, disruption happens whether it is an overnight disruption or if it's disruption by 1,000 little cuts. So you should all constantly be looking for new opportunities. One of the ladies who work with us, our Vice President of Client Engagement, Danielle Aguas, showed me a wonderful cartoon that we use to kind of keep us focused in our next iteration. So it's a little cartoon, and the very first panel says a little boy with a lemonade stand. It says fresh lemonade, 5 cents. No one's sitting in front of his lemonade stand. And in the second panel, it says fresher lemonade, 10 cents. And no one is standing in front of that lemonade stand. And in the third panel, it's hard lemonade, 25 cents. And there's a line, around the block for the hard lemonade. And so that has been our rallying cry. We're working on our website right now, and we're pivoting to, we have to do both and in terms of being ready for in-person and online, delivery of our services. And so we ask ourselves, as we're going through the next iteration of what we're doing, is this the hard lemonade approach? So, it's not going to be a toggle. And if you just do it a little bit differently than what you were doing before, you're probably not, somebody else is doing the hard lemonade pivot right now. So I think that's a fun way to think about it.
Just to clarify, Cheri, by hard lemonade approach, you don't mean you have to drink to come up with the idea, do you?
I'm just going to plead the fifth.
Hey, Dave, I noticed one of the comments said something to the effect of that sometimes it takes more than resiliency, especially in the tourism industry. And just want to throw out there that I was reading in the San Diego Business Journal this last week that there's a company that is in the tourism industry. I think it's a hotel reservation company. And due to the fact that nobody's booking travel, they've created a special product for people that basically pay for a hotel stay, but there's no date, nothing. They're just paying a discounted price to lock it in, and they get to use it at some point in the future, sort of like a timeshare, I would assume. But I thought it was a really cool way that somebody has tried to make lemonade out of lemons, and they've pivoted even in the tourism industry. So anyway, I really would like to think that in every industry there's some way to be different and to be creative and to come out of this winning. So I hope that helps. I don't know if that helps or not to the person, James, that commented that.
I think it does, and thank you for pointing it out, because I think I would also say to James on this, right, the resilience is the first part. Right, you have to have the resilience when nothing else happens, but it's not the end of the game, and that's the whole point. And that's why our title here is Resilience, Reinvention, and Resurrection. Because first you need to be resilient, then we figure out what our reinvention is, which is where we're playing right now. And then the resurrection comes, and whether it's a redesign of your business model, like you just described, whether that's long-term, short-term, who knows? We don't know how the market's going to respond. But if you look at, and to Cheri's point about disruptors, you look at what happened to Blockbuster, right? I mean, they owned, and for you young people watching, they had these things called tapes that you watched movies on. You had to go to the store and rent them, rewind them, and then return them, right? And then you put them in a thing called a VCR. Well, Netflix and Blockbusters were the two big guys. And then Netflix one day said, oh, we're getting rid of our tapes. I think there were DVDs at that point. And we're going to stream. And everyone's going, stream? No, we don't have the bandwidth for it. Look at them now. Right, so they had that resiliency, and then they saw the opportunity and resurrected themselves. We're just getting this in. It's really encapsulated right now pressure because of the pandemic, and it's a great opportunity. And that's what I think I want everybody to take out of this is the opportunity is there for us as either individuals or organizations to reinvent ourselves to meet and meet the normal, not the new normal, because there's always been a new normal. Normal has never been static. It's just right now the amount of change is really fast. So, but thanks for pointing that out, Brian. That's amazing.
Dave, can I add one
absolutely.
thing? I just want to piggyback on what Cheri had mentioned. It's a great example. I think I wanted to encourage leaders and owners to experiment more. Right? It's one of those things where like you see the opportunity, but you're not quite sure if it's going to be like the big win. So some of the best things that you can do is just try, small bite-sized versions of it, or try to figure out if there is a real business behind this idea that you have. We talk about it as market testing, business concepts, all those kinds of things, but beyond just drawing it on paper, actually test the model. And I think some of the highest performing companies, it's proven in the evidence that you read in these journals and books, is that all of them essentially figured out how to cannibalize their business model before someone else did, right? So if you're able to do that, if you're able to invest a little bit of time and money in figuring out what the next big thing is, you'll probably not be a lot better off on the sort of the reinvention scale. And also it builds the resiliency of the overall company.
So that's fantastic for not even large, but larger organizations that might have some resources. What about the smaller companies that may not have the resources? What can they do to test the model without having to invest, what is a limited amount of resources to do that, right? Because to them, that tug of war is between continuing with what I know that's been working, maybe not as well as I hoped, or taking a chance on something I don't know, and the opportunity cost there can be huge. Of course, so can the win. So what can they do to sort of put their toe in the water and not have to jump all in?
Dave, I'll give you a good example is business development. And that's where, our wheelhouse is. But like with business development, that's a great area to be testing new waters. If you've traditionally relied upon inbound marketing, you're probably hearing crickets right now. But it might be a good time to take a few people in the company that aren't busy enough and give them some business development responsibilities, direct contacting people over the phone the way we used to. And it's incredibly effective right now because people are quarantined and they're available by phone. So people are actually getting incredible results doing that, different than what they were doing 2 months ago. But this is a cool time to test new things. And it's interesting because we have a saying, it's when they zig, we zag. And right now, everybody is zigging in the way of sending emails and reaching out on LinkedIn, and everybody's getting overwhelmed. At least all executives, owners, business owners are getting overwhelmed with that. So when somebody is brave enough and bold enough and disciplined enough to make a few phone calls every day, it's incredible what they accomplish.
Okay, so one last question in reinvention before we move on. We spent a lot of time, most of this time, talking about reinventing businesses. There's a lot of people out there who are out of work who might be watching us right now going, I have this opportunity as well, right? I can reinvent myself. I don't have to go back to the job that I went to because of food on my table. I can pick something else. How do people reinvent themselves right now? Cheri, you want to take a stab at this?
Well, yes. Thank you, David. I wrote a book called Work on Purpose, How to Connect Who You Are with What You Do. I wrote it years ago based on the pivot that I made myself. And so it's an ebook. It's $2.99. Sorry, I know that's not supposed to be a sales call, but that
shameless plug alert. Shameless plug alert.
Maybe there's an ebook out there that could be called Work on Purpose. But yeah, what a great time, to sit down. We all have the extra time on our hands right now. If you know that you were really miserable in the job that you had before, or if you're furloughed or laid off right now and you weren't super passionate about what it is that you were doing, there's a lot of opportunity out there. And so I would do the job, do the inventory on yourself first, sit down and write the fundamental things that would make you happy in a job, or not happy, I don't like that word, but fulfill you as a contributor. What are the fundamental things, regardless of industry or role? What are those things that you could be exhausted and exhilarated at the same time after you've done them? Tap into what those are, and then start to reinvent how you might apply those things to the jobs that are going to be posted in the next few months. So prepare yourself.
That's great advice. I think I would add one thing to that. Pretend you didn't care about the money, right? Because we let that get in the way, right? So pretend money wasn't an issue. What are the things that would fulfill you like that? And I think that'd be really powerful.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just one more thing. We in America, especially, as soon as we graduate from college, we just immediately think I've got to pay off these college loans, and you might get into an industry or into a job just by virtue of having to make the car payment and make the mortgage payment and pay off the loans, and you just get into this cycle, and you get really good at something that you don't really love.
Yeah.
So what a great time to say, I don't really love this, what I'm doing, and I need to reinvent myself. And just because you haven't done the job before, when I did that for myself, I completely changed industries completely, and I found something that I absolutely loved.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have been through that. I mean, think how terrible it is that we have a saying, TGI Friday, right? Shouldn't it be TGI Monday?
It should be.
Right? I know I look forward to Monday every day. So let's move on to resurrection. So the big comeback, right? So now we're flexible, we're resilient. We've looked at the opportunities. We figured it out. This is it. We've tested it. We know. All right. We've developed a strategic plan. Now we have to execute it. How do we do that? How do you go about that? Clarence, we haven't heard from you in a little bit.
I think the first thing that we're going to try to do is, at least assuming that you've just thought up this plan, not everyone else knows it, you're going to have to get all the other leaders on board with it too, right? I think it was said earlier, Brian was commenting on middle management. I think one of the first things that usually happens in any size organization is, hey, are all the leaders on board? Are they aligned? Do they actually understand what it's going to take to execute it? Secondly, shortly thereafter, you're going to have to communicate it to your team, right? And figure out, okay, how can you work together? I think what's important when you do that communication with the team is that you're trying to enlist their help in fulfilling it, right? You may not necessarily have to tell them every little detail about what it is that they're going to do, but if you can share with them the rationale behind it, the purpose behind it, the grand vision, but also show them how it will impact their work, right? And how their work directly contributes to fulfilling that strategy and executing against that strategy, that goes a long way.
WIIFM, right? Everybody's favorite radio station. What's in it for me?
Yeah.
Absolutely have to speak to that. What about in a personal strategic plan, right? So that's a business strategic plan. We got to drive engagement to that. What if I've developed a personal strategic plan? I've taken Cheri's advice. I read her book. I was enraptured by it. I went, this is perfect. This is what I need to do. I come up with a strategic plan. These are the things that I think will fulfill me. That if I didn't have to worry about money, this is what I think I'd love to be doing. Now I got to execute it. What do I do?
Well, I'll just quickly continue. One of the things that I think you're going to do, and I think Cheri mentioned it as well, is that you're going to have to start first. If it's a totally different thing that you've done before, gain wisdom from, the experience of others, right? You're already in this dialogue, with trying to figure out, okay, is this something for me? Why don't you talk to people who've lived it, who've done it, who are doing it, get their perspective. What mistakes did they make? You're kind of almost still in the planning phase, but that is effectively part of the plan. You're planning not to fail at the plan. So you're taking in all this wisdom, and then you're now trying to figure out, okay, what should I be doing first? Now, clearly this plan has some goals. It has a timeline. You've done, for following Cheri's methodology, you're doing this sort of asset inventory. You know what you need to get. So as you're also gaining wisdom from experience, you're also probably trying to build skills. You're trying to also align yourself to others who you might meet along the way, right? If it's an entirely new business, or even an entirely different venture altogether, you're similar to, when we were talking about reinvention and we're talking about trying to build from an organizational standpoint, you're going to align with other people that will help you along the way.
Dave, I think that it's interesting, and Cheri, I'll make this fast because I know you got something to add to this. But if you're a business owner or an executive listening to this call, something that I would encourage you to think about is that your employees have all had a lot of time to think over the last couple of months, just like you've had a lot of time to think. And we've all sort of, I think we've all, literally all of us have shifted personally and professionally, spiritually, physically. I mean, we've all gone through a shift. So it's important to really survey your people. Like Clarence is saying, everybody's kind of dialing in their personal plan, their professional plan, they're making changes. But as an owner, man, I bet you there's a lot of employees that have brilliant ideas on how we can improve the business. And if you don't ask them, they might be afraid to suggest these things. So it's a great opportunity to really mine the resources that you have on your payroll, find out what are some of the ideas for ways we can improve this, implement it, and resurrect this company coming out of this thing faster and stronger.
Cheri, we'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I love that. I think the we're all in it together plan, Brian, is absolutely critical right now. I think whether or not you are an individual, individual contributor, or you're someone who just started a business, you're a sole proprietor, or you are the CEO of a multinational conglomerate, remember that we're not going to be able to just toggle back to where we were before. Focus is really still going to be a very tricky issue for us. Not every employee is able to come back to work. They may have childcare issues. An employee may have a spouse who works, in the medical field and is exposed right now. And so focus is really hard. Focus has been really hard the last few weeks, and it will continue to be hard. So I recommend that we start, whether again individually or corporate, you have a rallying cry, something that we can focus on for the next 90 days. What is it that we need to do? A short rallying cry with just 3 to 5 goals, whether that's no more layoffs or secure the SBA, loan, and then make sure that we can get it forgiven, or know what our forecast is, but reforecast between the rest of Q2 and Q4 and stay on top of those numbers. Whatever it is, be really clear so that you can cut through all of the noise from everything else that people are still going to be dealing with for the foreseeable future, probably for the rest of this year. So if you can focus on, don't forget your big strategic goals about who you are and what you want to accomplish, but you've got to be able to cut through all the chatter and the mess and the noise right now. So focus, 90-day sprints.
So we get back to work, we're slowly moving back in that direction. And I think 6-8 weeks ago, all of us were hoping that it would just be a switch thrown in, like, okay, everyone back to work. Yeah. Clearly that's not happening. And it's dribs and dribbles. And we could have a conversation about whether it's fast enough, too fast, too slow, whatever. It's immaterial. The point is, we're starting to go back to work, and some of us have found new opportunities. Some of us have said, you know what, we've recreated ourselves, or we found this opportunity, and we think this is going to be a long-term play, and our competitors aren't doing that. Mm-hmm. But now our employees, as we come back, the rest of the team is going, wait a second, this is new. We didn't do this way before. How do we get them engaged? How do we make them to buy into this vision, this new opportunity, to understand that this is the new way we're doing things? What do we do? Brian?
Yeah, there's a common theme there, right? It goes back to how we started this dialogue with dialing it down to specific actions, specific behaviors, keeping those goals small, keeping them attainable, just encouraging people to be pointed in the right direction, making sure to then, like we talked about after that, making sure that middle management is dialed in so that the message is being trickled down throughout the organization. All of this is just about striking that balance between creativity and thinking outside of the box, but then also really having a well-defined plan and sticking to it.
So how much input do we give our employees? Is this dictatorial, just here's the way it is, or we get by? What do we do, Cheri?
Well, I just wanted to, again, back to the toggling theme. Most of us have had an opportunity in the last several weeks to peer into our employees' offices, wherever that may be. We know more about them on a personal level than we did before. And now we have an opportunity to continue to reinforce those deeper connections in terms of who they are. And so I think the number one thing we want to do with them is be compassionate. Every single person has been through their own personal crucible, whether, some people deal with it better than others. I think mental health issues are something that they were a factor, again, before COVID. They're going to be a factor now. So trust is really your most precious commodity. With your employees and with your clients or customers, vendors. Trust is the most important thing. Can I trust you to keep me safe? Can I trust you to keep me employed? Can I trust you that you have, my best interests in mind? Like you said, what's in it for me, Dave? So we're going to have to be more compassionate. We're going to have to do more check-ins with our employees and make sure that they know that we get them and that we continue to treat them as individuals who we want to be a collective part of this team and to row together. So I think it's really important to provide that safe work environment first, just the basic psychological and personal safety, and then work them into the conversation about here's what we were thinking and here's why, and here's how you can be a part of that.
Oh, those are awesome sentiments. I mean, I can't stress that enough more. The empathy and compassion for your teammates, your employees. I would just add to that. I mean, in terms of reinforcing that idea or that value that, yeah, we are here in it together. We're going to get out through it. It isn't just about the emotional sort of taking care of the employee, but it's also feeding them in the more intellectual and work ways, right? So if it means that they have to grow their skills, if it means that they have to learn a new trade, if it means that they're going to take a different role, provide the means for them to do it, right? Show them that we really are in it together. And if I believe, like if I have a teammate that says, hey, you're going to take a different role, but you're going to do something totally different, but don't worry, like we're going to provide the training. You're going to have teammates that are also making the shift. So you'll have others that are going to be with you, and we're going to provide either coaching or whatnot. I mean, many of these things, they're not very expensive. They're not very costly, but they go a long way in terms of building, not just the getting through this, but also the longer term engagement. Right. And then they're going to start doing things that are even beyond just getting through this. Right. You start to cultivate more of the engagement and the high performance culture that way.
So I'm hearing something I want to clear. Are you saying that these techniques, these tactics that we're discussing as we come out of this aren't needed in a finite, but are actually something, a long-term change that we should be making or should have been doing all along? Is this a permanent way of doing business?
I'd like to say yes to all of them.
Sure. Dave, here's a blanket statement that I think applies to what you just said, and that's that from a sales perspective, no matter what your business is, you're in the business of selling your products and services, whatever that looks like.
Or ideas, if you're a leader.
Or ideas, yes. So if you're isolated right now, if you're making the mistake of being isolated, if you're not getting out and talking to a lot of people, you might think that right now it's maybe not the right time to be reaching out and trying to find new customers. And I would argue that you're wrong and you're making a mistake, because really whatever your product and service is, there are people out there that need your help. There are people out there that want your help. Not all of them, right? But they're out there. And there could be people out there that are, even if you're in the tourism industry, they can't wait to take a vacation. They are tired of being quarantined. They're bored and they're surfing the web and they're looking at, oh man, that trip looks so nice. And if they were to be tempted by some sort of an offer, they would pull the trigger today on a vacation for 6 months from now. If you kind of adopt that mindset that, look, not everybody out there is a client of mine or a prospect, but I've got to at least dial in the behaviors to go out and find people that are interested, people who need my help. That kind of discipline is relevant and true and effective now, and it's true anytime, whether you're in this pandemic or not. And so it's a great habit to keep, and it's going to keep you, happy. Coming back to the gym day after day, you're going to see good results from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me wrap this up with one question. I think we're coming into the final couple minutes here. So one question for each of you. We'll start with Cheri. Brian, you'll be last because you just spoke and you give you a chance to wrap your head around the question. And the question is this. Yes, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but only because you're more than capable. And that question is real simple. If there's one thing that you wanted people who are watching us now to take away from this, what would it be?
Oof. Uh,
This could be for an individual or for a company, whoever you want to address.
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that question because I am doing a series of leadership webinars myself, and I asked the same question. So I think the best advice that I got from a gentleman who has a double doctorate in psychology and theology, Dr. Tony Barron, immediately said he hopes that we will continue to take a Sabbath. He hopes that we will continue to take a day to step away, to turn off the screens, to have a meal with our family, to get outside and unwind ourselves, from the frenetic energy of what's going on. And I really appreciate that. I think we all spent a lot of time in front of screens and in front of social media and technology before, and 24-hour breaking news cycles, and it was kind of eating us up and before COVID, and it's even more. We're dependent on our screens now for survival, but the offset of those is walking outside, and barefoot in the grass and feeling the sun on your skin and admiring a sunset. Some things that we have the time to do now, and to spend time with the people that we love, and we need to make time to do that and recharge our batteries for whatever happens next.
Okay, great. So I love that. Stop and sharpen the saw. Love it. Great one. All right, Clarence, what do you have?
It wasn't explicitly said here, but it was the sort of underlying mantra that I tell myself every day, and that's be grateful and serve others. Right. And so when it's those moments where you really just can't take anymore and you think you've had it, it's hard sometimes to get into that mode where it's like you have to start thinking about like, okay, be thankful that you're here and you're alive. And even if you were sick, you could still find ways to help others. Right. So that second half is the thing that I have young children here at home. I try to, sort of have them repeat the same mantra. It doesn't always work, but I think it's helpful. It's been helpful for me in terms of thinking through a lot of difficult situations in the past and things like this. And I think once you start thinking that way, a lot of the things that all of us have spoken about, they all sort of come to mind, right? You're thinking about different ways of reaching out. You're thinking about different ways to help other people. You're thinking about different ways to serve them in a variety of different ways you may not have even thought of. But if you keep repeating that, eventually it'll start to take hold.
Yeah, absolutely. I love gratitude. And, I make a distinction personally between gratitude and thankfulness. My coach actually pointed this out to me. Thankfulness to me is transitory. Somebody opens the door for me, I say, thank you, I forget about it, there's no obligation. Gratitude implies an obligation to pay it back or pay it forward. And so I like to practice gratitude. So Brian, bring it home for us.
Well, two quick things. One is a fast comment that, again, we've had so much time to sit around and think. There is such a wealth of creativity, such a bank of creative ideas out there in all of your organizations. For all the listeners, think about all the ideas that your employees have had that are worth tapping into. But as far as takeaways for this, the most important thing in my mind is that people need to dial in what are the main behaviors, especially with regard to business development and client retention. What are the minimum main behaviors that need to be done on a daily basis with regard to business development and client retention? Help your employees know very clearly what those are make sure to drive that through middle management so that everybody's dialed in. And that way everybody can stay on track, be positive, feel good about get something done every day, putting together a streak. And, you know, when you come out of this, you'll be coming out of it at full speed.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, now we're going to open this up for questions. So I just remind our viewers and listeners out there, if you open up the chat, and that's if you go down to the bottom of the screen, you should see a little call out bubble. It says chat. Open that up and chat your questions in there. We'll read those out. We have a first question already, and here it is. So Brian, you touched on this earlier. You said what are some examples of resiliency and reinvention you each have seen? Brian, you talked about the hospitality industry, I think is what the viewer is referring to. So Clarence?
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting. I have a minimum standard of phone calls that I make every day prospecting, and I have to drag myself to do it just like everyone else does. I don't enjoy it, even though that's what I'm supposed to be teaching people on how to do. But, you know, I make those calls, and I get to know and I get to hear different stories almost every day. So I'm hearing things like a company that's in the decontamination business is obviously finding out entire new markets that need their help due to the fact that people want to sterilize stuff. And what would be another example of that? Well, I was just talking to somebody in a travel agency yesterday, and again, I think I mentioned this earlier, that they're starting to put together packages where people can pay upfront for travel that they use at a later date. So I just think those are a couple of examples of people being creative and being resilient. It seems like almost every person I talk to has found some way to pivot their business. And I mean, another example everybody knows is that restaurants are doing tons of takeout nowadays. And it's a lot of restaurants that never did a lot of takeout are doing tons of it. And that's something that is unlikely to change for a while. So yeah, lots of cool ideas and possibilities for reinvention. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, I think that's some great examples. Cheri or Clarence, either of you have any examples of pivots that you're either impressed with or aware of?
I think Brian was talking about the hospitality industry and even Airbnb. If you go into Airbnb right now, you can pay for a virtual tour of some cool location. And I think there's a lot of pent up demand. There's a lot of money sitting in a lot of bank accounts, and people are, you know, we're going to rush to the first organization or service provider or retail establishment that we can trust to give us a safe experience or a safe product. I have a wide range of clients. Some are in essential services and others are nonprofits. Talk about, you know, scary being a nonprofit right now. So, but they are brushing off their strategic plan and working on an operational plan. Besides that, money is cheap, and so they're looking at borrowing money right now, especially in the nonprofit world. So there's a lot of opportunities right now, and I think that pent up demand. If you are in if there's a market for what it is that you do, whether products or services, even if you are a theater company, I'm dying to see Hamilton on July the 3rd, and I'm going to sit in front of my television and watch it. So I'll pay $50 to see that. So everything is still necessary. If there's still a desire for it, then find a way to deliver it safely.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think what you just hit on something, right? So reinventing ourselves doesn't necessarily have to mean find a new product to sell. It could, or a new market to sell it in. It could be sell the same product to the same customers in a new way.
Yeah.
Right. Clarence, you got any examples?
There's a few, but I can't say that they were all triggered by the pandemic. I think a lot of the people that I've been working with recently, they've been sort of planning this pivot before. I think one specific one is, you know, doctors, they're psychiatrists who actually wanted to now go into, you know, well, let's take a step back without getting into too detailed. So depression, there's an uptick. It's been growing over the past several years, but it's probably even growing faster now. And, you know, from the studies that we were doing before, we know that there are certain forms of major depression that can't be treated by medication. And so there are all these alternative types of ways to treat it. And I think, for these, owners, these new doctors who wanted to basically say, hey, I'm going to try and create, extend my psychiatry practice and now try looking at these different ways of treating depression that can be more effective. I think the pandemic, while it didn't trigger them to look in this direction, it's probably telling them, okay, we should put our foot on the gas, right? How can we get in there earlier so that when we see that sort of wave of untreatable depression comes out, we're going to be there?
Yeah. So let me give 2 examples and we're going to wrap it up with a closeout question. Okay. So one, we've all heard an ad. I won't say the who. I don't know. I can't think of who it is, but there's a company out there that's advertising free installation because they're being paid by the PPE. I think that was brilliant, right? It's a great leveraging of a situation that's unique to this because they're saying my payroll is being covered, so I'm not going to double dip and charge you for my labor. I think that was a brilliant move. I really love that. I've got a friend of mine who is a marketing company. They strictly market to software developers. And one of his clients said, there's not a lot of demand for our product, but our clients need a lot of retraining for all the virtualization that's going on. They actually had a LMS element as part of their software that was just a add-on, not the core business. And they just started emphasizing that, and their sales doubled because their clients now have an LMS, which is a learning management system platform available. Again, I thought that was a brilliant pivot of taking one of your also ran things and making it into a core competency. So we have one question here. So one more question. I'm just going to throw this from Carolyn Burdett. Do you have any new recommendations for students looking for a summer job? And she puts in parentheses, they tend to lean towards hospitality and retail, and obviously that's changed. So
I'd recommend, there's a website called volunteermatch.com. It's nonprofits. That's a great way to stay busy, get some good experience if there's no other paying jobs out there available. And the other thing I'd say is that there's always opportunity in the world of business development. And even if you don't think your future career is going to involve selling, you're going to be mistaken to find that no matter what your career is, you're going to likely end up at some point needing to sell your products and services. So while you're young, while you're starting your career out, go ahead and get some experience doing some business development. It'll be good for you.
I think that's pretty good advice. Cheri?
Carolyn, thank you for the question. Hey, the North San Diego Business Chamber, the Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce, the North County Economic Development Council are doing a great job of curating and collecting and putting lists of who's hiring right now. That's where I would go if I had somebody who was looking right now. I would scour that because it's different than putting your resume out on Indeed and hoping something happens. These are job openings that are happening right now.
Finally, Clarence.
First, Carolyn, thank you for the question. I was just thinking back to when I had the same problem, but obviously not during a pandemic. I think there was something that Cheri had shared earlier about this sort of self-awareness and self-examination about your talents and your passions. I think that's an important thing. I mean, I'm not sure if you wanted to do a job in hospitality or retail. I'm sure there's probably, if it is great, at least you're in the right direction. If it's not, I think it's probably an opportunity to start seeking out things that you probably are interested in. And then secondly, I think you're now looking for those opportunities where you can make a difference, right? Because we're in such a state of flux, what you think is a job in whatever industry you think it is, it may not actually be as described, right? So if you have, an idea about how it might actually be better, or perhaps if it's not a job that's there, maybe you create one. This is a group of presumably owners and executives and leaders. I mean, there's nothing to say that you can't start your own business or create a job with an existing firm fulfill a need that's there that's not being addressed.
And so let me throw my 2 cents in on this too. I would, and this is going to be hard for a student to hear, I wouldn't worry about the money. This time in your life, as important as the money might seem to you, it really is not. Invest in finding out what you love to do, what fulfills you. Explore a lot of different opportunities and avenues, whatever that may be. Volunteer your time. Go to a company and say, I will work. Now, there'll be some issues here because we're in California, but I'll work free or whatever it takes, to do minimal amount. Just, I want to experience this. And the bad experiences are just as important, if not more important, than the good ones, because you can eliminate those, right? So don't look at them as, oh, this stinks. Look at it as like, okay, what is it about this that makes it so bad, so I can avoid that in the future and make it a learning experience instead of a bad experience. And 5 years from now, I'm not saying it's going to be 5 years it is, but 5 years from now, you'll find yourself doing something you absolutely are passionate about and love, and you'll have a head start on everybody else. So with that, one final question for our panelists, and we're going to wrap this up. So what is one thing that you are going to do differently as we move forward? And Clarence, start with you.
I'd probably sleep more. I haven't. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that I'm self-critical and slightly paranoid. So I've been using sort of this time to sort of get a lot of work done, try to build not just my own business, but also working with my clients and trying to help their businesses. So for like that example earlier where I was saying like they're trying to step on the gas, I've been kind of getting most of my clients to say, hey, move faster now. And so as a, as their advisor, as their coach and so on, I'm basically saying, hey, there's going to be great opportunity at the end of this. Be prepared, get ready.
I think that's awesome. Brian?
Yeah. So, if you look back to when smartphones first came out, we handled it badly. We used the smartphone as an excuse to work 24/7. This pandemic has introduced a new technology to some, which is Zoom conferencing. But I think as a society, we have agreed that we are not going to make the same mistake. We're going to use the ability to do meetings like this one to our advantage and free up the time that we would otherwise be wasting on the road or waiting on our coffee to get more stuff done in a tighter time period so that, like Clarence, we can get more sleep, so that we can spend more time with our families, so we can get back to the gym. Those are the things that I'm going to be doing differently, and I implore all of you to do differently along with me.
All right, and Cheri.
Yeah, the Sabbath idea. I've learned so many recipes. Oh my gosh, I've become such a great cook, and I'm going to keep doing that. It's really fun.
So when are we all getting together at your place for dinner?
Come on over, 6 feet apart. I really enjoy that. I have discovered so many new recipes. I found a creative outlet that I didn't have as much before. This is really, I find that I'm ordering things from a restaurant and thinking, what I made the other night was better than this that I ordered from the restaurant. So I'm going to be cooking more, and I'll continue doing that. It's a wonderful creative outlet that lets me shift from the mental, stress of work to doing something that is emotionally and nutritionally fulfilling.
And you do pickup, Cheri?
1-800.
I'm blessed that I'm married to a wonderful cook, and now we're so picky about the restaurants, because if it's not at least as good as my wife can make it and with good service, it's not worth going to. And it's hard to hit both of those. So for me, and I think it comes down to the Sabbath, it's a little different twist where there's a theme here though. So I'm one of those guys that if I'm not doing something tactical that's pushing the ball forward every minute of the day, I feel like I'm goofing off. But there's strategic time, there's me time, there's times to reflect, to relax, to learn, that you just got to sort of not be moving, right? And so you can take on new things, and that's been forced upon me, and I do it guiltily now, but I got to get rid of that guilt and just to make that as part of my day and week and routine, and I think it would be great. So I want to say thank you, Dylan. Hopefully and to our listeners, hopefully this has been much fun for you guys as I know we've had a good time doing it. I can speak for our panelists here. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Deb, and the Chamber for allowing us to do this and participate. This has been great. Dylan, back to you.
Thanks, Dave. So I hope everyone enjoyed, like Dave said. It was a blast putting this together for you guys. I want to thank Dave. Thank you for moderating, and Brian, Cheri, and Clarence. Thank you guys for sitting on the panel. You did a wonderful job. Hope everyone got some tangible ideas they can take back and put into place in their business. And I want to let everyone know that's listening that the 4 of them that you see up there today are chamber members. They're very esteemed chamber members and have been engaged in a lot of the things that we're doing. So we're very thankful to have them here today. And I also wanted to let you know, as we go forward with the different webinars, we are sure to engage our members, because that is going to be one of our key focuses during this pandemic, is making sure that everyone is staying connected, as is our goal with the chamber. So again, as we close out today, thank you everyone for your time. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Hi, everyone.